This is Peggy from WAR. So today our guest is Sinath Kim. So Sinath works at Portage and she's in charge of a partnership between portfolio companies and LP. Thank you, Sinath, for being here today.
Thank you, Peggy, for having me.
And you're a reform banker as well. So I know you're going to have a lot of great perspective on the new normal in financial services. So let's get started with the first question. So from your perspective, what would be some of the major lasting impacts from COVID in the financial services industry?
Yeah, I think that's a really hard question because it takes a bit of time for people to build habits. So what we end up holding on to is, I think, still to be seen. But the most obvious one would be the accelerated emphasis on the need for FIs to go digital, or at least grow their digital channels. FIs have been really slow or pretty reluctant to kind of fully digitize. And I think now there's a pressure to do so, especially given that social distancing has slowed down higher touch lines of businesses. You can't necessarily, if you're an insurer, go to a client's home and give them a medical test. You can't really ask a client to come in with their cars so you can do a test. For a long time, people weren't allowed in branches. So this is a high touch industry that now has to become much more low touch, although not necessarily less engaging, just lower touch when it comes to face-to-face. And I think this emphasis on digital really opens up opportunities in certain sectors in FI. Like in some of your previous interviews, you've already touched on an increased interest in telehealth. And I think really when people think telehealth, they're thinking you go on a video, you talk to a doctor, they diagnose you after you give them symptoms, and that's it. But now we can expand this to provide telehealth in the mental space, in the physical sickness space. There's a broader reach now, given that people can't or are reluctant to see people face to face. And then I think really one of the other things is the media attention on small businesses or your local businesses, which you really have to have a high volume of those businesses to make it viable if you're a big incumbent bank. But I think this is an opportunity where a lot of fintechs or smaller digital companies can really support the space where they can kind of pivot and help them out and build this niche. Because I think this is a space that needs a lot of financial help. And we see that every day, kind of, even if you just walked out on the streets, you can see that this is a space that is going to be looking for financial help and financial support. If not now, then when the economy reopens, for sure.
Yeah, no, and do you see in terms of regulations any impacts coming? You mentioned a few things here, but I guess regulators will look at any insights on that?
Yeah, from my experience with regulation and regulators, they're often reactionary spaces, and they're really slow to react at that. So they're not very proactive, and they're slow moving vehicles. So they tend to need to respond to something fairly overwhelming. And even though this feels overwhelming to us, I think as an industry, it isn't out of control enough for regulators to step in. The last time we saw kind of overarching new regulation, at least in North America, was during the financial crisis, where a lot of really big regulations were introduced. Right now, I don't think we have that kind of crisis in finance as an industry. And without that impetus for movement, I think it's unlikely that regulators will step in. And if the predictions around what a post-COVID financial industry can look like comes true and maintains itself, then we might see some reactions, but likely nothing in the next, I would say, short term. Mm-hmm. And if anything, and maybe this is a contradictory view of it, if anything, we might even get the reverse, where this kind of space that we find ourselves in pulls focus away from policies that affect finance, because there are so many other things that the government has to focus on. They have to focus on healthcare, on education, on social reform. There's so much happening in the outside in the world right now that they may shift budget away from some of the policies that they were looking into, such as open banking, because if you have a set budget on the list of things you're going to look into, open banking probably isn't top of mind when it comes to all the other things that are being impacted.
Fair enough. And talking about financial order, global financial stability, what's your perspective on where we're headed?
I think the obvious answer to that is, it's really more of a social shift that can bring about a financial shift. Everybody's moving to work from home, everything's become digital. It's increased cyber threats, not only to businesses, which when we think cyber threat, people think mainly business. But now that everyone's digital, everyone's kind of their own mini office. So there's this increase of cyber threats to everyone. And it's really hard to miss those headlines around like virtual conferencing, where all these virtual conferencing systems are being hacked. And with companies shifting to a fully work from home workforce, it's hard for them to control what people are doing, like how protected are people's networks at home? What are they doing to protect themselves at home? We moved and shifted very, very quickly, and that can leave us very vulnerable to gaps in this type of system. I think that's going to be a big one, and I think it already is a big one, and lots of people are talking about it. So there are people who are kind of really in the weeds on this topic, and I'm sure they know a lot more than I do. The second thing that I think is interesting is everyone's talking about debt, everyone is talking about kind of the unemployment rate, but I'm finding that the increase in savings is really interesting. For those of us who are lucky enough to maintain our jobs, we've sort of been forced into this situation where things that we're prone to spend money on is no longer available to us. And suddenly we're finding that we can save so much more. And what are we going to do with that extra savings? If these are people who are not used to saving, what can FIs do to help them maintain this habit that they've kind of created during this time? Especially, if you're the type of person who's never budgeted before, who's lived paycheck to paycheck, who's suddenly found themselves with a tailwind in their bank account, what kind of support will they have in order to kind of make this a lasting thing? Because if you read articles on this, a lot of people are predicting that once the economy reopens, everyone just goes back to their old habits of spending constantly. But can we do something? Is there an opportunity to make these savings habits really sticky? And is there someone out there that will do that? I think that would be an interesting opportunity, because there's an influx now of money that we haven't seen before sitting in people's bank accounts.
That's a very interesting point. I can see, to your point, the habits shifting.
Yeah.
Not necessarily to go back to your old ways, but what are these mechanisms you put in place to support you? That's maybe a new idea for a new company, Sinath.
Yeah, I will be sitting here thinking about one.
So in terms of competitive positioning, so obviously big disruption like the crisis we've seen and we're still in is an upsetting event that is changing competition landscape. So what do you see will be winners, losers, and maybe a wash?
Yeah, I think this is going to sound kind of self-serving, but the emphasis on digital and going cashless, I think this is really the time for fintechs to pull through and prove their worth. I know fintech's been we keep calling it a hot topic. It's been around for ages, and every year we call it a hot topic. But I think if not now, when? Like, this is the time, a lot of the incumbents had to spend 2 weeks to a month to get their workforce to become digital. That was a space of a month where, as an agile digital first company, you had time to strategize or to pull through or to push. And now, with kind of incumbents scrambling to become more digital, they're not going to be able to build internally fast enough, I think, to meet demand. And this may be the perfect time now to partner and to kind of fill those gaps. Although I will say, based on some of the reports that have come out, COVID has been a bigger boom to B2C companies than they have been to B2B companies. So on the flip side of that is if you're a B2C company, and you're a fintech, you're probably already great at engaging digitally. So where incumbents are now failing to engage because they can't engage in a high touch manner, you have a vacuum in which to push engagement digitally out and gain even more consumers. And I think that's really helped B2C companies kind of grow their business during this time. And I think the reports have shown that they have been growing their business at this time.
So you spoke about fintech and the opportunities they have on the B2C space, and hopefully on the B2B space that will probably come as financial institutions putting themselves together. In terms of digital transformation for large incumbents, what do you see happening? Of course, digital first, but that means so many things. What do you?
I think, like you're right. Every single bank has been in a digital transformation now for God knows how many years, right? And it's been talked about and constantly talked about. And I think if you're a consumer, you haven't seen much change.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't seen much change in the way you digitally bank with your big FI. I just was having a conversation with a friend not long ago around the digital experience we were having. We bank at the same institution, and we were just saying but the experience has not changed at all. Like where is the experience that we're supposed to be getting from these digital transformations? And I think now, where you can kind of say it and then you kind of take your time, as we all know, FIs can take ages to implement the big technology shift. They really have to speed up, and they have to speed up especially in those really high touch areas where they've now lost business because they couldn't do face-to-face. Anything now that has previously needed them to touch a customer can no longer touch a customer. And we've seen that in certain areas of legal where previously you'd have to go in and physically sign a document. They're now allowing you to take, digital signature. And I will say, if legal can allow you to take a digital signature, if they can make that move, there's no reason why banking can't make similar moves. And there's an impetus now to push these digital transformations. And if anything, especially working where I work, we've seen that kind of push where people have said, previously we've needed people to be face-to-face, and now we can't have that. And even if we are to go back to that, there's going to always be a segment of consumers who aren't going to want to go back to that, right? So these transformations have to stick now. We know branches are open and ATMs are available because there's always a segment of customers who say, I always need to step into a branch. I always have to have that. And these customers are not allowed to be in a branch anymore. And a lot of the times, and I don't want to generalize here, but a lot of the times, these are customers who are also very vulnerable to what's happening outside now. And they're the ones you definitely don't want to step into your branch. You want to protect your customers. You've got to find a way for them to bank with that high touch feel without them stepping into a branch. So you've got to transform, and you've got to do it much more quickly than you've ever had before, and get your customers to embrace digital banking.
That's the education piece as well, to your point, that has not necessarily always been front and center, where a lot of transformation was happening, but you as a client first had no idea that that capability was available, but also, to your point, more vulnerable, or maybe people who are a bit older, who are not necessarily keen on using digital, need more and holding, at least figuratively now in social distancing time. But yeah, that's absolutely true.
Yeah, and I think like any of us who have tried to call into a center to get help during this time, you know, for your travel insurance or for mortgages or for have found like this is not a channel that can sustain high levels of use. You have to broaden your ability to engage in a different way because all of those systems broke down,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and to your point, is the digital connectivity with the clients, but it's also the digital connectivity with your employees. So
Yes,
we
for
have
sure.
yes.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, if you were in an incumbent when COVID hit and you had to work from home, you probably encountered overloaded systems. You couldn't get into your networks. They were maxed out. You were suddenly working in shifts. Productivity probably decreased quite a bit in that first month. And you know, like VPN into a bank network is not always the smoothest experience. So focusing, it's almost like a lot of incumbents, although they'll never say it out loud, view employees as a cost center. You cost money. So that focus on providing systems internally to employees to better their experience hasn't always been a priority. You know, you focus on your customer, but if your workforce stays home, even if only 50% of your workforce stays home, you need to increase the ability to allow them to work from home in a much more smoother way. And I know it's a lot smoother now. You know, they've figured out a lot of the networking issues, but you know, giving them laptops that are 5 years old, that's really hard to update technology that doesn't necessarily support new browsers, for example.
Okay. Yeah.
That probably needs to be rethought.
And it's a good point because the employee piece is a piece that we tend to forget when we talk about digital transformation. So last question for you, lighter questions. What are the new habits that maybe hopefully good new habits that you took during the last few months?
Oh, I don't think I was one of those ones that made new good habits, actually. I'm a bit of a homebody anyways, so I kind of embrace that stay-at-home life. But you know, with all the things that make you a bit healthier closed, the gym, going outside, I may have become even more of a sloth than I was before. Like wrap myself as a taco and sit on the couch every time I was finished work. I'm actually trying to get back into my better habits now that things have reopened.
Okay.
So hopefully I'll get there again when we reopen. But right now I'm just embracing the couch life.
Okay, so no YouTube video of working out and stuff like that at your home.
I'm practicing self-love by sitting on the couch and watching more TV than I have in a very, very long time. Probably more than that's healthy.
You need to relax as well. Well, thank you so much, Sinath, for your thoughtful comments. That was really, really good to have you with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peggy. It's been great speaking.
Bye.
Bye.